It's just after midnight when the doors slide open. A man walks in, clutching his side, fluorescent light. A nurse moves fast. Somewhere behind a curtain, a machine starts beeping in a rhythm that means someone is paying very close attention to a number on a screen. 3 hours later, he walks out, stitched up, diagnosed, told to rest. He almost forgets about it, until an envelope shows up in his mailbox 2 weeks later. He opens it. $10,000. He stares at it the way people stare at things that don't make sense. Not because the number is impossible. Hospital bills reach numbers like this every single day in America. But because nothing on the page tells him what it actually means. $10,000 for what, exactly? A room? A doctor's time? A test? A machine that hummed somewhere down the hall for 20 minutes? A bag of saline that costs pennies to produce? Here's the strange part. That number, the one that made his stomach drop, might not even be the number the hospital ends up collecting. It might not be what his insurance company pays. It might not be what he personally owes. It could be 3 completely different numbers wearing the same disguise. And that's where this story actually begins. Not with outrage, not with a villain, with a question nobody ever stops to ask. Who sets this price? Who actually pays it? Where does the money go once it leaves your hand? And how does an industry built on treating sick people turn into one of the largest, most complex economic machines in the entire country? We're not going to answer that yet. First, we need to understand something most people never think about. The bill you receive is not the business itself. It's barely even a receipt. It's the tip of something enormous, submerged, and almost entirely invisible. Picture a hospital listing a procedure, let's say hypothetically, at $12,000. That's the sticker price, the number on paper. But an insurance company negotiating on your behalf may have already agreed to a completely different rate months or years earlier, say $4,000 for the sake of illustration. Not because the hospital is being generous, because that's the contracted rate the two organizations settled on, likely after long negotiations involving lawyers, actuaries, and spreadsheets most patients will never see. The insurance company might pay a portion of that negotiated rate. You might owe the rest, depending on your deductible, your co-insurance, your co-pay, whether the hospital is in network, and a dozen other variables buried in the fine print of a policy you probably skimmed once and never opened again. So the $12,000 number on the original bill, it was never really the price. It was closer to an opening bid in a negotiation you weren't even in the room for. This is the first thing you need to understand. A hospital is not a store. You can't glance at a shelf, see a price tag, and know what you'll pay. The price depends on who you are, who insures you, and what deal was struck long before you ever walked through the door. But that raises an even bigger question. If the price isn't fixed, why does it need to be this complicated in the first place? To answer that, you have to go past the waiting room, past the check-in desk, into the machine itself. A hospital isn't one building doing one job. It's an emergency department that never closes. Operating rooms sitting ready even when they're empty. Laboratories running tests around the clock. Imaging departments housing machines worth millions. Pharmacies stocked with medications that expire whether they're used or not. Intensive care units where a single patient can require a team of specialists working in shifts all night, every night. Add security, food service, cleaning crews, IT systems protecting sensitive medical records, compliance officers making sure every procedure meets government regulation, administrators coordinating a workforce that can number in the thousands. None of this turns off because business is slow on a Tuesday. A CT scanner doesn't get cheaper because nobody used it this afternoon. An emergency room doesn't get to shut early because there were no car accidents tonight. A trauma team can't clock out because no one needed them this hour. Here's the sentence worth remembering. A hospital isn't just selling medical care. It's maintaining an enormous machine that has to be ready before the customer ever walks through the door. You're not just paying for what happens to you. You're paying, in part, for a system that had to be standing by, fully staffed, fully equipped, in case you needed it at 3 a.m. But readiness alone doesn't explain everything. There's another layer, and this one involves power. Because behind almost every hospital bill sits a negotiation you never see, between the hospital and your insurance company. Every insurer negotiates its own rates with every hospital in its network. That means two patients could walk into the exact same hospital, receive the exact same procedure, and end up with wildly different financial outcomes. Not because of anything they did, but because of which insurance card was in their wallet. If you're insured, part of the bill is negotiated down before you ever see it, and your responsibility is often limited to a deductible, a copay, or a percentage called co-insurance. If you're out of network or uninsured, you may be looking at something much closer to the original listed charge, the one number in this entire system that almost nobody actually pays in full. So who has the power here? The hospital setting an initial price? The insurer negotiating it down? The government regulating pieces of the system? Or the patient, who typically has the least information and the least leverage of anyone at the table? The honest answer is all of them, pulling in different directions all at once. And nowhere is that tension more visible or more expensive than in the emergency room. Emergency departments occupy a strange corner of the economy. In almost every other industry, you compare prices before you buy. You don't do that during a heart attack. You don't call 3 hospitals for quotes while having a stroke. The entire premise of emergency medicine breaks the basic rule of a normal marketplace: informed choice. To make that work, hospitals maintain staff, equipment, and capacity for emergencies that might not happen tonight, but absolutely have to be ready for if they do. That readiness is expensive and unpredictable, and it doesn't scale neatly with how many patients actually walk in on any given night. That doesn't mean every emergency room is quietly printing money. Some operate under serious financial strain, especially in areas with high numbers of uninsured patients. The truth is messier than hospitals profit off emergencies. The real story is this: emergency departments are selling something almost no other business sells: the guarantee that help will be there, whether or not it's needed tonight. Now look at the machines themselves. An MRI can cost well over $1 million before it even scans its first patient. A robotic surgical system can cost even more. These machines need specialized technicians, ongoing maintenance, software updates, calibration, and staff trained for years to operate them correctly. When you see a scan of your own body on a screen, you're seeing the output of a machine that had to work perfectly, because someone's diagnosis, maybe someone's life, depended on it. That's real. That's not an excuse, it's context. High costs explain part of a hospital bill, but they don't automatically explain every single price on it. Keep that tension in your mind. It matters later. Because to really understand where hospital revenue comes from, you have to stop imagining a hospital as one business and start imagining it as dozens of businesses operating under a single roof. Inpatient care, outpatient procedures, surgery, imaging, laboratory testing, specialty clinics, pharmacy services, physician arrangements. Some of these generate stronger margins than others. Some quietly lose money every single year and continue running anyway, because a hospital has to offer certain services even when they aren't financially rewarding, simply because a community needs them. That creates something researchers sometimes call cross-subsidization. Profitable departments indirectly supporting less profitable but essential ones. It doesn't happen the same way at every hospital, and it isn't guaranteed. But it raises an uncomfortable question worth sitting with. What happens when the most important services aren't always the most profitable ones? This is also where one of the biggest misconceptions in American healthcare needs to be permanently corrected. Revenue is not profit. A hospital system can report billions of dollars in annual revenue and still operate on thin margins because nearly all of that money immediately flows back out. Salaries for doctors, nurses, and staff, the cost of medications and supplies, equipment purchases and equipment maintenance, buildings, utilities, debt payments, insurance, technology infrastructure, regulatory compliance, and continuous reinvestment just to keep the doors open and the machines running. A billion-dollar hospital system does not necessarily have $1 billion sitting in a bank account. Billions in revenue and billions in profit are two entirely different sentences, and confusing them is where most people misunderstand this entire industry. This gets even stranger with non-profit hospitals, which, despite the name, are not charities in the way people imagine. Non-profit status doesn't mean nobody gets paid. It means there are no shareholders collecting profit the way a typical corporation distributes it. Non-profit hospitals can still have highly paid expansive buildings, investment portfolios, and significant operating surpluses. Those surpluses are generally required to be reinvested into the hospital's mission and operations, rather than distributed as dividends. It's a different structure, not automatically a cheaper or more charitable one. So if there are no shareholders collecting ordinary profit, where exactly does the surplus go? Often, back into the machine itself. New buildings, new equipment, expansion. Which brings us to scale. Large hospital systems don't run one hospital, they run networks. Multiple hospitals, outpatient clinics, imaging centers, laboratories, physician groups, sometimes spanning entire regions or states. Scale gives them purchasing power, shared infrastructure, and negotiating leverage with insurers that a single small hospital could never have on its own. But scale also multiplies complexity. More departments, more systems, more administration, more risk. The bigger the system becomes, the more powerful it can become, and the more expensive it can become to operate. Which brings this entire story to its real center of gravity, the fight over who controls the price. Hospitals negotiate with insurers. Insurers negotiate with employers. Government programs set their own reimbursement rates. Pharmaceutical companies and medical device manufacturers set prices for the drugs and equipment hospitals depend on. Doctors and specialists factor into cost structures depending on how they're employed or contracted. Patients sit at the very end of this chain, usually with the least visibility into any of it. The price you eventually see isn't handed down from one authority. It's the final visible fragment of a negotiation happening across an entire economic ecosystem, most of which occurred long before you ever needed care. So go back to that envelope, that $10,000 number sitting on a kitchen table somewhere in America. Now you see it differently. You see the listed charge and the negotiated rate hiding behind it. You see the insurer's portion and the patient's remaining share. You see the doctors and nurses working through the night, the machines that had to be ready before anyone needed them, the building, the technology, the supply chains, the administrative systems keeping all of it barely functioning together. You thought the bill was the story. It was actually the receipt from a much bigger system. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. That number on the page may not even be what the hospital ultimately receives. Hospitals don't become massive economic institutions simply because they charge enormous prices. They exist at the intersection of medicine, insurance, technology, labor, infrastructure, government regulation, negotiation, and overwhelming demand. All colliding, all at once, every single day. The real story was never, hospitals charge too much. The real story is that American healthcare is one of the most complicated marketplaces ever built. One where the number you see and the money that actually changes hands can be two completely different things. So the next time a hospital bill lands in your mailbox, don't just look at the number. Ask who created it, who negotiated it, who paid it, and where every single dollar actually went. Because once you understand the business behind the bill, you realize you were never just paying for a procedure. You were stepping into an entire economic system, and only just now seeing it for what it is.